Hey guys, welcome back to Cop Tool. My name is Scott, and today we are taking a look at cordless inflators. This month, Dewalt released their new cordless inflator that's modeled DCC020IB, and we want to know how it stacks up against some of the other competition that's already on the market, namely the Milwaukee M12 Compact Inflator, that's the 2475-20 model, and the Ryobi 18V inflator, the P731. So we're going to take a look at some of the following characteristics: inflation speed, features, and overall value. Then we're going to let you know which we think is the best buy for your dollar. So, all right, let's get these things pumping.
Before we get started, let's take a quick look at each model. First up, we have the Dewalt, the newest to market of the three. This 20V max corded and cordless air inflator can run on 3 different power sources: a 20V max battery, a 12V DC car adapter, or a 110V AC wall plug, which is sold separately. It features a high-pressure rubber hose, threaded metal chuck, and all the typical onboard accessories you'd expect. It has a dual LCD digital gauge, a wheel for dialing in the target PSI up to 160 in increments of 1/10, and auto shutoff. It also features a high-volume hose for allowing fast inflation or deflation of air mattresses and other inflatables. And finally, it has an onboard LED light for dark areas and solid rubber feet on the bottom. Overall, it feels solid right out of the box. It's a hefty 5.5 pounds without the battery attached. You can pre-order the bare tool for around $99. Next, we have the Milwaukee M12 Subcompact Inflator. The Milwaukee M12 cordless compact inflator is a little different from the Dewalt in that it's primarily focused on car, light truck, and compact equipment tires, and it only runs on the M12 battery platform. There's no high volume feature for this model. So as such, it's only rated to deliver up to 120 PSI in increments of 0.5 PSI, and it too has the auto shutoff feature for inflating to a target. It's got a large backlit LCD display, rubber anti-vibration feet, and a 26-inch hose with an all-brass chuck. The Milwaukee also feels like it is built well. Even with it being a little smaller than the others, it's still 3.8 pounds, and as a bare tool, you could pick up this model for around $69. And finally, we have the Ryobi ONE+ dual function inflator-deflator, which has been on the market for almost 2 years now. It's got a similar overall design to the Dewalt and is capable of being used for both high volume and high pressure inflation. It has the smallest LCD of the 3 and features automatic shutoff at a target of up to 150 PSI in half PSI increments. This model is the lightest of the 3 at only 2.8 pounds. It simply doesn't feel as solid as the Dewalt or the Milwaukee. At around only $39 for the bare tool, it's the lowest price point by far. So for today's comparison, we're going to test their performance by inflating 3 items in increasing order of size. 1, a completely flat basketball. 2, a hand-cooked spare tire. And 3, a unicorn pool raft. Let's see how each of them performed and what we learned about each model. First up, the basketball. We fired up each model to inflate a completely flat basketball. How flat, you ask? Well, we put an inflation needle in it and applied 160 pounds of even pressure until no more air could be released. Then we set our target PSI to 10 and timed the results. So first up, the Dewalt 20V. It filled the basketball to 10 PSI in a smooth 42 seconds. No problems. Second, the Milwaukee M12. The Milwaukee filled the basketball the fastest in only 24 total seconds, but it took an extra restart attempt to get there. The internal PSI gauge thought it was full when that clearly was not the case. We thought that might be a fluke, so we deflated the ball and tried again with the same result. Both times it still felt a little flat in the end. In short, it seemed to struggle with the lower PSI setting. Third, the Ryobi 18V performed the worst. This is the only model without a threaded chuck, and the construction quality just isn't there. I was worried about breaking the plastic when attaching the needle, and it also struggled with the lower PSI setting and took multiple restart attempts to get it up to 10 PSI in 53 seconds. We're talking 8 total attempts, and the ball clearly didn't feel full. Not a great start for the Ryobi. In this round, the Dewalt performed the best in that it reached the target PSI most accurately in only 1 attempt. Next, the spare tire. We drained the spare tire to around 3 to 4 PSI for each attempt before setting a target inflation of 45 PSI on all 3 models. First, the Dewalt 20V filled the tire to 45 PSI in 2 minutes and 38 seconds. Solid. This is when we realized how handy the dial is for setting the target PSI. So much better than having to hit the plus button repeatedly to get up to 45. Second, the Milwaukee M12. The Milwaukee was the fastest to 45 psi at 2 minutes and 25 seconds, edging out the Dewalt by 13 seconds. It's impressive. You can tell that this is what this model is made for. And third, the Ryobi 18V. The Ryobi filled the tire in 4 minutes and 7 seconds, by far the slowest time. So much slower, in fact, that I had time to browse coptool.com for articles and videos. So in the spare tire test, the Milwaukee performed the best, with the Dewalt in a close second and the Ryobi a distant third. Finally, the Unicorn Raft. We excluded the M12 from this test as it doesn't have a high volume feature, and the Raft's wide mouth inflation port was too big for any of the included attachments. So this really is just a face-off between the Dewalt and the Ryobi models. First, we unboxed the Unicorn Raft. It's important to note that the Raft requires inflation to the head and the body separately, so we're adding the two together to get a total time. We could tell right away that the first inflation of this Raft would take the longest because it has zero air in it. It's never been inflated, and it's pressed and shipped flat in a box that it'll never fit into again. So we went ahead and filled it once for good measure to ensure the same starting point for each contestant. To deflate the Unicorn, we laid on it, then rolled the thing flat into a reasonable size that you'd store away in your garage. First up was the Ryobi, and it performed very well. It filled the body and the head of the Raft in 4 minutes and 45 seconds. But we noticed two major issues. One, the thin foam feet on the bottom of it do nothing to stop it from walking away, and it needs to be wrangled to stay close to the Raft when in use. Two, the tube attachment for the high volume, it feels like it's made from a cheap plastic water bottle. No way does this thing last very long. It feels like you might break it when you're pushing it back into its storage slot on the side. But at least it stayed locked on tight during the test, which was an issue for the Dewalt. Speaking of, the Dewalt took much longer than the Ryobi, almost a total of 7 minutes to inflate the Raft. Not that great. After 7 minutes, my kids wouldn't want the Unicorn anymore. Also, the Dewalt's high volume tube just doesn't want to stay attached to the inflator. If you move it in the slightest, it comes unscrewed and you have to pause to reattach. This was common throughout this test. But compared to the Ryobi attachment, at least the Dewalt tube is made from a thicker plastic. So, finally the Ryobi performs well in a test. But unfortunately, the high volume attachment on the Ryobi feels cheap, and we preferred the Dewalt's accessories. So, in conclusion, overall, the quality of each inflator really does align with their price points. Frankly, you get what you pay for. The Dewalt was far and away the best model of these three, but it's also the most expensive. And while it wasn't the fastest in any test, it performed very well and has the best features overall. We really loved the dial for targeting a higher PSI, the dual LCD display, the solid construction, and the multiple options for power. The Milwaukee performed well, but it simply lacks the overall features of its competitors. It's really designed just for smaller tires, and that's about it. But it does this job very, very well. So if you're just focusing on fast tire inflation, this is the model for you. And the Ryobi, well, it showed some power on the large volume Raft, but that's about it. It's the cheapest of the three in both quality and price point. It just doesn't feel like this model is built to last, so we can't recommend it.
All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and check out coptool.com for more information. We'll see you next time.